The transport vessel, New Dawn, was humanity's pride, carrying 300 families to establish a new colony on the rim worlds. Kim Ji-ho had spent weeks watching the stars through the massive observation deck, dreaming of the new home waiting for them. At 10 years old, he was old enough to understand they were pioneers, but young enough to see it as the greatest adventure of his life. The ship groaned like a wounded animal as catastrophic engine failure tore through its heart. Ji-ho felt the artificial gravity flicker and die, sending loose objects floating through the corridors like deadly projectiles. Emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red as the ship's computer announced in multiple languages that they had mere minutes before impact. His parents, both engineers, had rushed to the engine section when the first explosions echoed through the hull. Ji-ho's mother had kissed his forehead and promised they would see him soon, pressing his little sister's worn teddy bear into his hands before disappearing into the chaos. That promise now felt like a lie as the ship screamed through an alien atmosphere toward certain death. Ji-ho strapped himself into an emergency pod, following the safety drills they had practiced during the journey. Around him, other passengers did the same, their faces masks of terror and desperate hope. Children cried for parents who might already be dead. Adults whispered prayers to gods who felt impossibly far away. The impact came like the fist of an angry giant. Metal screamed against stone and soil as the New Dawn carved a mile-long scar across the surface of an unknown world. Ji-ho's pod tumbled through the wreckage like a marble in a washing machine, his small body thrown against the padded walls until darkness claimed him. When he woke, silence had replaced the chaos. His ears rang, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. The emergency pod had done its job, cracking open like an egg to deposit him onto the alien soil. Around him, the twisted remains of humanity's greatest ship lay, scattered like broken toys. Ji-ho called out for his parents, his voice small and frightened in the vastness. Only echoes answered him. He searched through the wreckage for hours, climbing over bent metal and shattered dreams, but found no other survivors. The engine section where his parents had gone was nothing but a crater filled with melted steel. The Daiwam sky above him was wrong. 3 suns hung like burning eyes in a crimson dome, casting multiple shadows that danced and shifted as the alien world spun on its axis. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thin enough that each breath felt incomplete. Strange forests of metallic trees surrounded the crash site, their branches chiming like wind chimes in the alien breeze. His survival pack, designed for emergencies, contained protein bars that would last a week if he was careful, water purification, tablets, a basic medical kit, and his father's old geological scanner. The device had been a gift from grandfather, a relic from the early days of space exploration, but it still worked. The scanner's readings made Ji-ho's heart sink. Gravity was twice what he was used to. The atmosphere was barely breathable. Radiation levels were dangerously high. As the first of the 3 suns began to set, casting the metallic forest in hues of purple and gold, Ji-ho realized the terrible truth. He was completely alone on a world that seemed designed to kill anything foolish enough to try living on it. The emergency beacon that should have called for rescue lay crushed beneath a section of the ship's hull, its light dark forever. Strange sounds began to emerge from the forest as darkness fell, howls that sounded almost human, the scrape of claws on metal, and something else that made his spine tingle with primitive fear. This world was not empty. Things lived here, things that had probably never seen a human child before. Ji-ho clutched his sister's teddy bear close to his chest and tried not to cry. Tears were a luxury he could not afford. If he was going to survive long enough for rescue to come, he would need to be smarter, braver, and more resourceful than any 10-year-old had ever been. The alien world stretched before him, vast and hostile and completely unforgiving. But Kim Ji-ho was human, and humans had not conquered the galaxy by giving up when things looked impossible. 2 months of survival had transformed Kim Ji-ho from a frightened child into something harder and more determined. His body had adapted to the crushing gravity that made every step feel like he was carrying another person on his back. His lungs had learned to extract every molecule of oxygen from the thin air. Most importantly, his mind had begun to understand the deadly puzzle of this alien world. The planet operated on rhythms completely foreign to human experience. Twin moons danced overhead in a complex orbital pattern that created tidal forces strong enough to bend the metallic trees like grass. In a storm, Jiho had learned to read these patterns, knowing when the forest would shift and groan, when hidden passages would open between the moving trunks, and when it was safe to venture out for food. The blue sap that oozed from the metal trees had become his lifeline. At first he had been terrified to try it, remembering his father's warnings about alien biochemistry. But hunger and desperation had finally driven him to take a tiny taste, then a sip, then a full drink. The glowing liquid tasted like electricity and honey, filling his empty stomach and giving him energy that seemed to last for days. His father's scanner confirmed what his body already knew. The sap was not just safe, it was incredibly nutritious, packed with proteins and vitamins his human body could actually use. Building shelter had been his first real victory. Using twisted pieces of the ship's hull and branches from the metal trees, Jiho had constructed a small cave-like hideout, wedged between two massive roots. The space was barely large enough for him to lie down, but it was invisible to the predators that hunted above. His small size, which had made him feel weak and helpless on the ship, now became his greatest advantage. The predators were nightmarish creatures that seemed designed by evolution's cruelest imagination. Pack hunters the size of earth elephants moved through the forest on silent paws, their 6 legs carrying them effortlessly through terrain that would challenge a mountain climber. Their howls echoed through the night, a sound that made Jiho's human instincts scream at him to run and hide. But he had learned that running was useless. Instead, he made himself small, squeezed into spaces too narrow for their bulk, and waited for them to pass. During the day, different dangers emerged. Flying creatures with wings like razor-edged metal swooped between the trees, hunting for anything that moved. Jiho had learned to stay perfectly still when their shadows passed overhead, holding his breath until they disappeared into the crimson sky. Ground-dwelling scavengers searched for carrion with senses so acute they could smell fear itself. But they ignored small, quiet things that posed no threat and offered no challenge. It was during one of these long, motionless waits that Jiho first saw them. The beings moved through the metal forest like liquid grace, their forms shifting and flowing in ways that hurt his eyes to follow. At first, he thought his mind was finally breaking under the stress of isolation. Hallucinations were common among crash survivors, according to his father's survival manuals. But these hallucinations spoke to each other in musical tones that rang like crystal bells. They had purpose and intelligence in their movements, carrying tools and working together in ways that only sentient beings could manage. Jiho watched from his hiding place as one of them approached a metal tree and began to harvest something from its trunk, using instruments that seemed to grow from their very hands. The being was tall and impossibly elegant, with limbs that stretched and contracted like liquid mercury. Its skin shifted colors constantly, flowing through shades of silver and blue and deep purple like oil spreading across water. When it moved, there was no sound at all, as if it weighed nothing despite its size. Then it stopped and looked directly at Jiho's hiding place. For a moment that lasted forever, human child and alien being stared at each other across an impossible gulf of biology and evolution. Jiho's heart hammered so hard he was sure the creature could hear it. His muscles tensed to run, though he knew there was nowhere to go. But instead of attacking or calling for others, the being simply tilted its head like a curious bird. Its skin rippled with new patterns, colors Jiho had never seen before flowing across its surface like living art. When it finally moved away, disappearing into the forest with the same silent grace it had shown before, Jiho realized something incredible. The alien had been just as surprised to see him as he was to see it. In a galaxy full of wonders and terrors, a human child surviving on this death world was apparently something worth noticing. The first real meeting happened 3 days after their initial encounter. Jiho was collecting metal tree sap in makeshift containers when Kayleem appeared again, moving like flowing water between the metallic trunks. This time, she didn't just watch from a distance. She approached slowly, her skin cycling through colors that Jiho was beginning to recognize as curiosity mixed with caution. Jiho held perfectly still, remembering his father's advice about first contact situations. Never make sudden movements, show empty hands, appear non-threatening. Of course, his father had been talking about meeting other human colonies, not shape-shifting aliens on a Deathworld, but the principle seemed sound. Calum stopped just out of arm's reach and made a sound like wind chimes singing in harmony. When Jiho didn't respond, she tried again, this time accompanied by graceful hand gestures that seemed almost like a dance. Jiho realized she was trying to communicate, and he felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. He wasn't alone anymore. Their early conversations were exercises in creative problem-solving. Jiho would draw pictures in the metallic dust with his finger, while Calum would respond by changing the colors and patterns on her skin. Simple concepts came first: food, water, danger, safety. Jiho learned that rapid red flashes meant warning, while slow blue waves indicated calm or agreement. The breakthrough came when Jiho's improvised shelter started leaking during one of the planet's frequent storms. He was trying to patch holes with scraps of metal when Calum appeared, watching his struggles with obvious interest. Jiho showed her how he was sealing the gaps with tree sap, demonstrating how the sticky blue substance hardened when exposed to air. Calum's skin lit up, with patterns Jiho had never seen before, excited spirals of gold and silver that made her look like a living constellation. She gestured frantically toward the forest, then back to Jiho's patch job, her meaning clear even without words. This was something new to her, a solution her people had never considered. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened through shared discovery. Jiho learned that the Veltai were incredibly strong and could reshape their bodies to fit almost any space, but they thought in very rigid patterns. When they encountered an obstacle, they would go around it or wait for it to move naturally. The concept of changing the obstacle itself was foreign to them. When a fallen tree blocked the path to Calum's favorite sap-gathering spot, she began planning a detour that would take several days. Jiho studied the problem differently. The tree was massive, far too heavy for either of them to lift directly, but he remembered lessons about levers and fulcrums from school, concepts that seemed like ancient history now, using a long piece of ship debris as a lever and a chunk of stone as a fulcrum. Jiho showed Calum how they could move the enormous tree with their combined strength. Her skin erupted in amazed patterns as the massive obstacle rolled aside, clearing the path in minutes instead of the days she had planned to spend walking around it. Word of the strange alliance spread through Veltai society like ripples in a pond. Other members of her species began appearing at the edges of the forest, watching the human child with mixture of fascination and disbelief. They had lived on this harsh world for thousands of years, accepting its challenges as unchangeable facts of existence. Now a small alien creature was showing them that problems could be solved instead of simply endured. The real test came during acid rain season, when the planet's weather turned truly deadly. Drops of corrosive liquid fell from the crimson sky, eating through metal and flesh with equal enthusiasm. The Veltai had always dealt with this by retreating deep underground, sealing their tunnels and waiting for the storms to pass. But Jiho couldn't fit in their underground spaces, and his human physiology wouldn't survive weeks in the low-oxygen environment of their shelters. As the first acid drops began to fall, it looked like their friendship would end in tragedy. Instead, Jiho's human creativity saved them all. Using salvaged material from the ship and his growing understanding of the planet's physics, he designed a canopy system that could be quickly deployed over their food storage areas. The angled surfaces directed the acid rain away from vital supplies, while channels he carved in the ground carried the dangerous liquid safely into natural drainage areas. When the Veltai emerged from their shelters weeks later, expecting to find their surface food stores destroyed as always, they instead found everything perfectly preserved under Jiho's improvised protection system. The human child had not just survived their world's most dangerous season, he had thrived and shown them how to do the same. That was the moment Jiho stopped being a curiosity and became a teacher. The deep space monitoring station at Kepler base picked up the signal on a routine sweep of unexplored sectors. It was weak, almost lost in the cosmic background radiation, but the frequency signature was unmistakably human. Lieutenant Park Sujin ran the analysis 3 times before she believed the results. The energy patterns matched those of a colony, transport that had disappeared 8 months ago without a trace. Captain Lee Minho received the report, while his survey ship Star Seeker was refueling at a frontier outpost. The New Dawn had been carrying 300 souls toward a new life among the stars. Finding wreckage after so long would at least give the families closure, though he held no hope for survivors. Deathworlds had a way of claiming lives quickly and completely. The planet where the signals originated was marked in red on every navigation chart. Class 9, Deathworld, extreme gravity, toxic atmosphere, hostile ecosystem. The kind of place where even hardened Marines in full environmental suits counted their lives in hours, not days. No human could survive there for 8 months. But protocol demanded investigation, so Captain Lee assembled his team. Dr. Kim Yuna, the ship's xenobiologist, packed her instruments with the grim efficiency of someone who had cataloged too many disaster sites. Chief Engineer Bae Junho loaded their shuttles with heavy-duty excavation equipment, expecting to dig bodies from twisted wreckage. None of them prepared for what they would actually find. The shuttle bucked and shuddered as it descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere. Captain Lee gripped his restraints as readings flooded his display. Gravity 2.1 times Earth normal. Atmospheric pressure barely adequate for human survival. Radiation levels that would cook an unprotected person in days. This was a world designed to kill anything foolish enough to land on it. The wreckage of the New Dawn stretched across several kilometers of metallic forest, its twisted remains scattered like the bones of some massive creature. Captain Lee's team began their grim work, scanning for life signs they knew they wouldn't find. The crash had been catastrophic. No one could have survived the impact, let alone the 8 months that followed. Then Ensign Choi Min-soo called out, from his position near what had been the ship's main corridor. His scanner was picking up movement in the forest, something large approaching their position. The team immediately went to combat readiness, weapons drawn and shields activated. The metallic trees around them began to shift and sway despite the absence of wind, and strange musical sounds echoed through the forest like alien song. What emerged from between the metal trunks challenged everything they thought they knew about. First contact protocols. The beings were tall and graceful, their skin flowing through colors like living art. They moved with purpose and intelligence, carrying tools that seemed to grow from their very bodies. But most shocking of all, they weren't alone. A small figure walked among them, human in shape but changed by months of adaptation to this hostile world. The boy was taller than he should have been. His muscles developed in ways that spoke of constant struggle against crushing gravity. His skin was darkened by alien suns, and his eyes held a depth of experience no 11-year-old should possess. Captain Lee lowered his weapon slowly, hardly believing what he was seeing. "Are you Kim Ji-ho from the colony transport New Dawn?" The boy smiled, an expression that held both immense relief and unexpected confidence. "Yes, sir, I've been waiting for you." His voice carried an accent that hadn't been there before, musical tones borrowed from his alien companions. What happened next redefined humanity's understanding of survival and adaptation. Ji-ho didn't just translate between human and Veltai languages. He bridged 2 completely different ways of thinking. He explained concepts that the aliens had never considered, while teaching the rescue team to see solutions they had never imagined. The Veltai settlement that Ji-ho led them to was unlike anything in the xenological databases. These beings, who had lived the same rigid existence for millennia, were creating art. Patterns of light and color danced across their skin not for communication, but for pure beauty. They had learned to sing in harmonies that made the metal forest ring like a vast musical instrument. Children played games that would have baffled their ancestors, chasing each other through obstacle courses that required creative thinking rather than just physical prowess. Elders gathered to hear stories told by voices that changed pitch and tone to match the emotions of the tale. All of this had started when a small human boy showed them that problems could be solved instead of simply endure. Dr. Kim Yuna recorded everything with scientific precision, but her hands shook as she worked. They weren't just witnessing first contact. They were seeing the birth of a completely new kind of civilization, one that combined Veltai strength and adaptability with human creativity and imagination. Captain Lee found himself in uncharted territory both literally and figuratively. His mission had been to recover bodies and file a tragedy report. Instead, he was facilitating the most significant cultural exchange in galactic history, all made possible by one remarkable child who had refused to die quietly on a world that should have killed him in days. The rescue ship. Horizon's call hummed with quiet efficiency as its crew prepared for departure, but Kim Ji-ho felt like he was being torn in half. Everything he had dreamed of during those long, terrifying nights in the metal forest was finally within reach. Hot meals, soft beds, safety, and most importantly, the chance to see family who had grieved him as dead. Yet leaving felt like abandoning everything that had given his survival meaning. The Veltai had gathered in numbers Ji-ho had never seen before. Hundreds of them filled the clearing around the crash site, their skin displaying patterns of such complexity and beauty that it took his breath away. They called him Sekar Nim, Small Starbringer, a title that carried weight in their culture. To them, he wasn't just a survivor or even a friend. He was the spark that had ignited a revolution in how they saw their world and themselves. Kayleem stood closest to the ship's ramp, her usual graceful composure cracked by emotion. Her skin showed deep purple waves shot through with silver spirals, the Veltai expression of profound sadness mixed with gratitude. She had been his first friend on this world, his teacher and protector, and now she faced losing the being who had changed everything about her people's existence. In the communication bay of the rescue ship, dozens of messages waited for Ji-ho. His grandmother's tear-streaked face filled the screen as she spoke about empty bedrooms and birthday celebrations that had turned into memorial services. His uncle had moved across 3 star systems to help search for the missing transport. Cousins he barely remembered had sent drawings and videos, creating a family album of love and loss that made his chest tight with emotion. Captain Lee found him there, staring at faces that seemed to belong to another lifetime. "It's a lot to process," the captain said gently. "Take your time." But time was exactly what Ji-ho didn't have. The ship's schedule was tight, and staying on this death world longer than necessary was dangerous for everyone involved. The crew had already taken enormous risks just to verify his survival and document the Veltai contact. High Command wanted answers, scientists wanted data, and most importantly, his family wanted their boy back. Ji-ho walked back to the ship's entrance, where 2 worlds waited for his decision. The Veltai had taught him that some choices couldn't be made with logic. Alone, sometimes the heart had to lead. But his heart was pulling him in both directions with equal force. "Captain," Ji-ho said finally, his voice carrying the confidence he had learned during months of life-or-death decisions. "I want to go home. But I can't abandon the Veltai. They've become my family too." What followed were the most intense negotiations of Captain Lee's career. Long-range communications flew between the rescue ship and Earth, carrying proposals that had never been considered in human history. The Galactic Council had strict protocols about contact with developing civilizations, but the Veltai were clearly advanced beings who had made their own choice to embrace change. Ji-ho found himself at the center of discussions between diplomats, scientists, and military leaders across multiple star systems. Everyone wanted to know how a child had achieved what trained xenologists had never managed: peaceful, productive contact with a completely alien species that had transformed both cultures involved. The breakthrough came when the Veltai themselves joined the conversation. Through Ji-ho's translation, they made their position clear. They didn't want to lose their small Starbringer, but they understood that he belonged to his own species as well. They proposed something unprecedented: a formal cultural exchange program with humanity, with Ji-ho serving as the first ambassador between their worlds. 3 days of intense planning followed. Supply schedules were arranged, communication protocols established, and safety measures put in place. Jiho would spend 6 months each year on the Veltai homeworld, serving as both student and teacher, while spending the other 6 months among humans, sharing what he had learned and helping prepare other cultural ambassadors. As the Horizon's Call finally lifted off from the planet's surface, Jiho pressed his face against the observation window and watched his second home fall away. Below him, the metal forests gleamed like jewelry in the light of the 3 suns, and he could see the Veltai settlement spreading between the trees like drops of living art. Kalim's final message to him had been displayed on her skin in patterns of gold and green, colors that meant until we meet again in their complex emotional language. She would be waiting when he returned, ready to continue the work they had started together. The boy who had crashed on this world 8 months ago had been helpless and alone, barely surviving from one day to the next. The young man who was leaving had become something new, a bridge between species, a proof that humans could not only endure impossible circumstances, but could transform them into opportunities for growth and connection. As the stars opened up before the ship, Jiho smiled. He was finally going home to the family that had never stopped believing he might somehow still be alive. But he was also carrying with him the knowledge that home could be more than one place, and family could include beings who didn't even share the same sun.